The question is the motion be agreed. The Honourable Dr Brian Walker.
Thank you, Acting President. And thank you to my honourable colleague, the Honourable Steve Thomas there, for giving us a wonderful demonstration of exactly why, on both sides of the House, we ought to be very careful to look very closely at what's going on, because what we're basically seeing here is that we're not getting value for money. And it might be strange that this practicing doctor is getting up speaking to issues about economy, and I'll briefly touching on that as well. But what I really wanted to start off by saying is actually giving some congratulations to the government, because as far as budgets go, it's an okay budget, as far as budgets go. But I was struck when the Premier said that we're talking about this abominable idea of a racetrack in Burswood for some several $100 million against the views of the people who live there, and indeed for most of the people in the state, I imagine, when we were told, but we went to the country, to the state, with this as our policy, that we are mandated now to provide something that no one really wants. And rather than actually spending the money that they are going to spend on renovating the land and making it a beautiful place for people to walk and play and take their animals and to bring their friends when they're visiting, much like Kings Park, rather than doing that, no, we're going to actually make a polluting from noise, polluting from gases, polluting from a despoilation of nature, and then clothing it in language of, but the public wants this. And I wonder if this actually is reflected in the rest of the budget as well, because there's areas there where I think, OK, we ought to have a closer look at what's actually going on. But what I would also point out, and thanks to my colleague here, is that we are all committed to evidence-based policy and compassionate behaviour as we serve the people of this state of ours. So let's list what the government has done well in the budget. And it says, OK, fiscal responsibility. We have a consistent operating surplus, $2.5 billion a year ago and $2.4 billion now. Well, we could quibble about the amounts of debt that have been accumulated. And I listened with great interest earlier to the fact that the debt now is actually more than the debt when the Liberal government lost power in 2017, I think it was. It was heading like that. And it's interesting, because that means in 8 years of good profits, we're actually not reducing the debt burden at all. And I question, why are we allowing ourselves to have the back patted when we're not making any progress in an excellent economic environment? We have a record infrastructure spend, 13.7 billion in the year before and 12.1 billion just now. But I was also really struck by the fact that we had around about $10 billion overspend in one project. That's almost a quarter. That's over 4 years. But that's almost 1/4 of the annual budget spent on 6.8% of the population. And I think, OK, I get it. I get why you'd want to spend an awful lot of money on a small number of people. And it's certainly having the transport infrastructure is a great idea. I do like that. The Labour governments are, I think, known for that, whereas the Liberal governments would rather that you actually walked or maybe take a horse. I note vets would benefit. Indeed, I'll do what I can to support you. The economic stability is there. We do have strong economic growth, we're told, 3.4% growth, which brings me to wonder why we focus so much on growth when growth cannot be sustained eternally. If we always grow, we'll outgrow what the earth can provide. We ought to be looking at sustainability, not perhaps growth as such. But it's nice that we've got growth, if we're measuring that. Moderate wage growth and controlled inflation. It's interesting that, because with what we're seeing now is the middle class are now more and more turning towards the need for food help with food bank, because they're no longer able to put food on the table in the face of their mortgages and other expenses. But it's nice to know that we are allegedly having moderate wage growth with controlled inflation. I notice also the $963 million in targeted household relief measures for the cost of living initiatives. I'll come to that in another moment. The energy bill relief and the expansion of the WA student assistance payments and kids sport vouchers. I wonder why one of those is actually reduced, reduction in that for those who are least able to afford a reduction. The housing and infrastructure, significant investment, we're told, in social and affordable housing, which is really something I've failed to see when I'm sitting in my clinics dealing with people who have told me that they've no longer got housing, they're actually sleeping in their cars, or having to manage people who have got severe stress because they are barely able to afford the rent or the mortgage and are cutting back on the essentials of life. But we have significant investment, I'm told, in social and affordable housing, 1.4 billion. And then we compare that with actual figures, which suggest that we're spending less in our population for housing than Tasmania. So I look at this budget and I wonder, okay, interesting figures. And they're absolutely believable. I'm just wondering what questions have been asked to give the answers that we're getting. Education, increased education funding, $1.8 billion. Excellent. And I review that with the recent information about the NAPLAN scores, which would bring shame to any West Australian at what is happening to our children. And then we look at the community safety and justice, with additional funding for police operational priorities of $80.4 million, and comparing that with what's actually happening on our streets. The recent fire bombings and shootings at a tobacco shop. The violence we're seeing on the streets, the record rates of domestic violence, the inability of the police to record within their own ranks those who are actually domestic violence committers. And I notice also another pat on the back for the environment and sustainability, an initial investment in renewable energy and decarbonisation, which is, I think, excellent. We ought to be doing that. But as we've just heard, there are serious concerns for that. And I'm just wondering, when it comes to the environment, how it was that in a recent debate we had in this very chamber, that the Environmental Protection Agency amendment was actually widely consulted on and passed in this chamber with overwhelming majority in that time of the numbers, to discover that the consultation was indeed very widespread, very wide-ranging consultation, but interestingly only with those who were in the industrial side, and not one single member of the environmental community was consulted on that very important piece of legislation, resulting in further degradation to the ability of the Environmental Protection Agency to actually protect the environment. And it's no wonder then that, as part of the information we had at that time, that we have lost 70% of our vegetation in this state. And it seems that no one bats an eyelid. So when it comes to this budget being put to the people and how appropriate it is, I wonder how genuine that is actually a budget which speaks to the needs of the people and how much speaks to the needs of a government. Because we're talking here about the essential funds we need to keep our great state going. Where are the values? Where are the important elements of this budget when it comes to actually achieving what do we want in our state? Do we want peace? Do we want harmony? Do we want people to live good quality of lives? Do you want to give maximum opportunities to people as they develop, our children as they're growing, to be able to be what they can be, do what they choose, and work together cooperatively to make our great state even greater? And we're seeing massive domestic violence, massive ambulance ramping, societal dysfunction. So the question is, who are we? Who are we, really? Well, we here are the custodians of a great ship. A vessel called Western Australia is built by many hands, steered by many captains, and it has also weathered many storms. And yet, as the seas grow rougher, as the winds shift and the hull groans under the strain. The crew at the helm busy themselves with polishing the brass. They tell us all is well. I'd like to hear that. The course is true, that the leaks in the lower decks are indeed nothing to worry about. But you and I, we all know, control is not the same as direction. And direction, true, clear, purposeful direction is what our people are crying out for. This budget, like too many before it, on both sides of this House, claims to be the chart and compass that we need. But when we look closer, we find a map drawn by vested interests, a compass that spins toward power, not the people. So looking here at what might be failing in our current budget, looking at the shortfalls, and I have to point out, one of the main areas I see that is really of concern is the status quo thinking on both sides of the House. We saw recently from my colleague, the Honourable Steve Thomas, once again, status quo thinking. We have got coal power, we have got the fossil fuel industry. Immutable as it is, we cannot change that. And the incremental changes that need to be made as we move towards a transition towards more sustainable energy forms. So many reasons not to do that, so many ways to hold things back, so many ways to ensure that we stay stuck in our current iteration. Our budget continues this incremental and reactive policy framework. This is because, on both sides of the House, the underlying problem is a belief, a sustained belief in the neoliberal policies that have been misguiding our society all through the world since the 1930s. You see, part of my job as a doctor is to look at all the symptoms there, and I can put a plaster on all the symptoms, but the underlying cause, if I leave it unaddressed, those symptoms remain. And the same is true of our society. All of the ills we currently see, there's an underlying, underpinning force which is resulting in the ills we currently see. And it seems very evident, at least to my maybe untrained eye, that the underpinnings, the very foundational start of the problems, that is not being addressed. We have status quo thinking on both sides, playing one idea against the other, fighting the same old battles, looking for the same old solutions and getting the same old answers. Our compass is spinning. The ship is lost at sea, and it's slowly sinking. This underlying neoliberal assumptions that this is all we have. Work harder, and you too can be rich. Work harder, and you too can be a multi-millionaire, able to afford that boat, to have your holidays, to take your time off. And what do we see? People working 2 jobs and still not able to put food on the table. People whose children cannot go to the schools they prefer because they simply haven't got the money to afford for the uniforms and the books, or indeed feed their children before they go to school. It's actually really quite confronting. And what about our social justice gaps? We've talked about closing the gap. Well, this is a kind of a word here. We're looking at the Indigenous gap. What about everyone's gap? What about the gap between people living in Kwinana and people living in Netherlands? There's gaps all over the place. We have insufficient structural reform to the justice system, or as I call it, the injustice system. We have a punitive system rather than a restorative system. We have limited measures addressing systemic inequality and poverty. We have underfunded, we have consistently underfunded mental health, aged care, and disability services. And people are suffering, they're groaning under the strain of further attempts to fiddle in incremental changes to a status quo system which is not serving the people. Do I find disagreement here in the House? Do I find disagreement with this general situation? Educational shortcomings. Are we actually training our children to do what's needed in this ever-evolving world? Or are we still insisting on treating our children like future mill workers, which was the original system, educational system? Are we still treating our children as if they should be employed, work their fingers to the bone, and die an early death? I think we are. And this budget does nothing apart from fiddling around the edges of that. So one of the major questions that the people asked before this budget was put out, before the election, one of the major questions, now we all know the question, the cost of living crisis. How has this budget helped? Every Australian knows the truth. Life is getting harder. It's in the rent which swallows half the paycheck. It's in the grocery bill that grows faster than wages can pay it. In the electricity bill that arrives like an unwelcome guest, demanding more than we have to spare. The daily examples I see in my life as a general practitioner are horrifying. People coming in unable, basically, to pay for the medication I prescribe. People whose choices are such that their ill health is guaranteed because they cannot afford, either in time or effort or money, that which is needed to restore themselves to wellness. Children, I see, with a diagnosis of ADHD or autism, who are condemned to wait 18 months, 2 years, before they can begin to see someone who can diagnose that at a huge expense. All the while, they're refused educational assistance because they don't have the diagnosis, leaving them 2 or 3 years later, 2 or 3 years behind their peers. Can they catch that up in a social system which doesn't allow them to progress at a faster rate, to catch up with their peers? They're left hanging. And what are they going to do when they hit years of puberty, these children who have been neglected and ignored and left to rot on the heap of humanity? When they try to make their way in the world and find that the way is blocked, they haven't got the necessary educational needs, what are they going to do? And we wonder about that when we see 55% or so of our prisoners suffering from ADHD with the choices they have made. And we're quite very happy, rather than actually fixing the underlying problem, to treat them like a First Fleet mentality. Let's transport them out of our society, rather than the other end of the world, we'll transport them into the penal system. And you see them boomeranging in and out of this until they either... Did you know that the life expectancy for those whose lifestyle choices includes a spell in prison, that life is of 22 years less on average than for you and me? Are we happy with this? Well, apparently yes, because no changes have been made. We are apparently happy with that. But this budget tells us there is relief. Relief, they say, that will make a real difference to struggling families. Really? Really? Look closer. A family of 4 will have, with that amount of money that we have given them, $700 a year, what does it actually mean? For a family of 4 with 2 children in the high school, that budget relief gives them the equivalent, for a family of 4, half a cup of coffee a day. Half a cup of coffee a day relief. I ask you, can we at all be... What are we doing? Praising ourselves for half a cup of coffee a day and saying, yeah, we're giving you budget relief. And they call this a feast. It's not a feast, it's not a relief. It's a reminder of how far we have sunk. I recall the days when a father, earning very low wage, my father was kicked out of Malaysia and had to find work here, unqualified work, make his way there. We could afford a house. My mother was also working, also part-time. We could afford a house, put food on the table, with very meagre income then, but we could afford that. Now, a couple, both working, 1, maybe 2 jobs. And are they able to afford that house? Of course, you know the answer. It's not is not as easy as it was. Why? We have gone backwards. So the backbone of our society, the people, is being driven into poverty by status quo thinking that congratulates itself on handing out crumbs while keeping the loaf. Let's name the cause. I'll say it again. It's the neoliberal status quo politics which keeps things just the way they are. We fiddle at the edges. And this budget is another example, a good example. It's an okay budget as far as budgets go. Did a good job. Where is this money going? What values does this budget show? We've got an over-reliance on traditional sectors. We heard about the iron ore price, $104, I think it was, which is actually far above where it used to be. Great. We're chucking our iron ore towards China and relying on that. People are working hard, especially on the mines, coming back, blowing it, until they realise they've got a partner and children and they've got to actually save money, by which time their health is damaged. It's a lack of visionary investment in the transformative technologies that we need. There's a lack of investment in the future industries that we need. We have a status quo thinking problem. More of the old is giving us more of the same. Do we as a people want that? Healthcare system gaps. Now, should I mention the 7,008 hours of ramping? I was speaking a few days ago, with a nurse, patient of mine, midwife actually, and asking, you know what the politicians say about the ramping? And I said, what do you think the cause is? Do you think it's that we've not got enough money spent in ED? Not enough St. John's ambulances? We both agreed the problem there was actually nothing of the sort. It's a lack of full-time equivalents on the wards to keep within budget, so no nurses to supply the beds, no beds for the patients to go into from ED, therefore there's a backlog onto the street as people are being ramped, because the fundamentals of the health system are just not being met, because, I'll speak about this in more detail later, because the fundamental underpinnings of wellness are not being met. If you don't meet the fundamental underpinnings of wellness, sickness is going to increase, and the costs will increase. What about the tax system? We heard recently, there's a question here about our GST. The GST, remind me again, was that not supposed to be a limited tax imposed by Canberra to help pay for the Sydney Olympic Games? A temporary tax. How long have we been fighting over the scraps of GST on the temporary tax which is being persisted on? Now we're seeing electric vehicles. Oh, the petrol tax that we're putting on there isn't enough for the roads. Let's tax now the electric vehicles. How is it that we find a way of always finding a way of taking money out of the pockets of the people into government? What about, for example, stamp duty? Who on earth thinks stamp duty is a good idea? We've got to get the money to feed the people, to feed the government. Capital gains tax. Isn't government renowned for the fact that we're excellent at squeezing every last cent out of someone to put into a tax because we've got so many obligations? I have to ask you now, has anyone ever really looked at how much money we waste of the tax money we bring in? How much money do we waste? There's calculations there that 35% of the money we give into the tax system is chucked down the drain. Now, in government, you say, well, listen, we're doing what we can. It's going to be recycled, of course. We, the people, and all of us here are, of course, we, the people, we're paying our tax money as well. Are we happy that almost 1/3 of it is just frittered away? Is it that unimportant to us? We don't even mention it in the budget. What about? I saw a solution a little while back, a 10%, when Bulgaria ceased being a communist country and they were in financial strife. So rather than actually reforming a very complicated tax system, they said, right, screw it. 10% flat rate tax for everyone. Individuals, families, companies. You companies, you're paying 10% tax. Now, I have to ask, who here doesn't know that many of our large companies pay minimal tax? Are we happy with that? So in Bulgaria, they paid 10% tax, at least for a little while. Became 15% later. And their economy flourished. Who wouldn't like a maximum tax rate of 15% in our country right now? Who wouldn't like that? So why aren't we doing it? There's an acquaintance of mine, Jason Miotti, put out a tax idea which basically said, if you were to cut all these taxes that we're putting on people and put a fairly simple incremental tax rate, we could actually solve the problems. We've run it through a number of iterations. One thing we don't have in this Parliament here is a parliamentary budget office, so that these ideas can be actually examined by the people who are the professional treasurers. We don't have that here. It's stuck in the hands of government, and the actual solutions are just not being made available. So why don't we consider taking the burden of tax off the people, you know, the ones who vote for us? Why don't we just do that and allow the companies not to have to pay all their expensive auditors and accountants, and pay a flat rate tax, everyone, without exception? It might even be a good idea for the resource companies to start paying tax on some of the oil and gas they're sending offshore. I mean, is that out of this world? I mean, look, for example, what happened in Norway as against what happened in the UK when they taxed the North Sea resource of oil and put it into sovereign fund. It's over $1 trillion now, which every person in Norway can benefit from. And what have we done with that in our resource-rich state? Has anyone given that any serious thought at all? Then we can look here at alternatives. Let's stop stealing from the people and let's start creating revenue. I know, I mentioned this last term of Parliament. We have the fourth budget paper that the Honourable Pierre Young mentioned here. By legalising, regulating cannabis, recreational cannabis, it would generate $1.25 billion in the 4-year forward estimates. How many hospitals could be built with that? How many aged care homes? How many childcare units could be actually built with that? Not a bad idea. Oh, we can't do that. No. What about the hemp industry? Nothing at all to do with intoxication, nothing whatsoever. About $20 billion we could look at. Do you think that would balance our dependency on the iron ore trade? Would that be useful, perhaps, at creating sustainable fuels? Would that be helpful in making materials we could send into space with a burgeoning space industry? Would it be an idea to have an innovative viewpoint as to how we might create, rather than simply deplete our population and bemoan the fact that they are homeless and leave them to waste away in the streets? One of my pet concerns, of course, is our veterans who have served our country, often at risk to their life and limb, and those we praise for half a day a year on Anzac Day, and yet, for the rest of the time, we leave them just to gently vanish into their PTSDs, their chronic pains, leave them to survive if they can. And when we walk by them in the street, perhaps we might give them a McDonald's meal or chuck them a few dollars. Thank you for your service. What are we doing? What about a housing revolution, a more major expansion of the build-to-rent scheme, a social housing fund, things we could give to people which really make a difference? What about educating our children for a new future? Major educational reform, emphasising STEM and digital literacy. What about the skills of critical thinking? I'll tell you why we don't teach our children critical thinking in schools now. It's because then they could see what a shambles we are and would choose someone else. But our future, the generations now who are being taught not to think, who are being taught to condition themselves to work in jobs which already are becoming obsolete and are going to end up in the dustbin of history, because we haven't equipped them or haven't equipped our teachers in the schools to educate them for the future. This is what we're doing by not planning for that in the budget. So it's not bad luck about the cost of living issues. It's not an unavoidable global tide. It's a deliberate result of decades of neoliberal policy. Now, the liberal policy is a creed which tells us markets will save us while those very markets strip us of our security, our dignity, indeed our savings. I tell you this, the cost of living is not a seasonal headline. It's a slow erosion of our way of life, and it will not be solved by the same hands that caused it. And so I say there's another way, a different kind of politics, a different kind of a party, built for a different kind of a future. And I wonder what that party will look like. We come now to the area where I have particular pains, because that's my area of particular illness, the interest, the health and wellness, the sickness system, as I call it. A sickness system, because we allow people to get sick and then find a proportion or a solution that will help them become less sick. So we don't have a health system which is looking towards people's wellness. It's a sickness system, a machine designed to treat illness, not to prevent it. A machine that profits, like from the weeds in the garden, and never pulls them out by the roots. Looking at the foundations of illness, rather than looking at the symptoms. And this results in social justice gaps. If you're unable to work because of your chronic pain, then you're not going to be helping in the economy, you're going to be suffering. The family around about is going to be trying to manage things. You try doing things on NDIS just now and realise what an abhorrent system that actually is. We've got, I said before, a first fleet mentality for those who aren't cutting the mustard. A first fleet mentality. You can't manage, we're going to punish you. You've broken the law, you're going into prison. You're going to suffer. We're going to make you pay for the way in which you have actually not done what you should do. I'll come to that in a little while, actually. I've got some figures which might be interesting for you. We've underfunded, as I said, mental health. We've underfunded aged care. We've underfunded disability services relative to need. We've underfunded dentistry. So we've got health system gaps. And we all know this. In fact, we've probably been in it ourselves. We've probably all experienced that to some degree or other. Who hasn't sat in ED for over 4 hours? Why do people go to ED when they could be seeing a general practitioner? I recall a story a while back. I'd broken my leg. I had my left leg in plaster. I was clumping up and down ED. I was walking by that stage, clumping up and down. So I just finished sewing someone's hand. I remember it very well. So clump, 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 go to the next patient, throw back the curtain. There's a man sitting there with a sore finger. He looks at my broken leg, he looks at his finger, and realizes he shouldn't be there. I had a patient one time, a woman had been attacked by a Rottweiler, and her arm had been, well, a chunk of her arm was just hanging loose. I've got some good pictures if anyone wants to see them, by the way. And I was sewing it together. The nurse comes in and says, Doctor, the patient in the waiting room is getting really, really angry, and she demands to be seen now. I was not in a good mood. Bring her in, says I. So in comes this woman with a sore throat, comes clumping in, the curtain's thrown back, and there I am with this very bloody arm. There's nerve exposed, there's muscles exposed, and I'm busy just cleaning it just now as I'm getting ready to put it together again. Comes clumping in, throws the curtain back and sees this disaster in front of her, and she realizes, oh, I'm in the wrong place now. Open your mouth, says I see a red throat, take 2 Panadol and go away. Why was she in ED in the first place? Why did she come with a sore throat to ED? Well, I'll tell you what our EDs are at this very moment. There are elderly people who have fallen from their beds. Now, think what this is, that the beds are often put down to floor height, so it's about 10 centimetres off the edge of the floor. But when they fall out of their beds, it's technically a fall from a bed. And to cover their backsides, the managers in the understaffed aged care homes insist upon sending that patient by ambulance to a hospital so they can be assessed by ED so their backsides are covered from an insurance point of view? Do you think our EDs are less troubled by that kind of patient blocking our ED and causing problems elsewhere? So the person with a quiet heart attack is sitting there waiting for the elderly person to get sorted while their heart gently collapses. We have a systemic problem, do we not? And we're not addressing it by chucking more money into a failing system. We spend billions, literally we spend billions each year reacting to crises that could have been presented with foresight, with education, with genuine community care. We build more hospital beds, sometimes, but do nothing to stop the tide of people who need them. We fill prescriptions, but ignore the conditions that make people sick in the first place. Did you know that preventing illness costs less than treating illness after it happens? If we were to work on preventing smoking, because we make it so deeply unpopular, not by banning it, that doesn't work, then the risk of heart attacks would go down. It's a lot more complicated than that, but if we allow people to do that which is causing them harm, we've now got heart transplants and stenting the coronary arteries, or treating the cholesterol, or looking at how do we manage when they've taken the legs off. How do you manage that? So it's far cheaper to actually prevent illness in the first place, is it not? So when we come to preventing illness, let's talk now about mental health. Did you know there's about 9 suicides a day in Australia? 9 suicides a day. That doesn't take into account all the burden of major mental health that we are suffering from in our state. An epidemic of despair we're facing right now. And does our budget do anything to fix that? It remains underfunded, under-prioritised, is deeply, deeply unsexy and under-discussed. And that's just Perth. How about the regions? What access do we have in the regions to mental health? In the vernacular, bugger all. So the neglect is worse in the regions. The need is most. The services are fewest. You know, it's as if we've decided that wellness is a luxury for those who live close about 1 kilometre from our parliament, maybe an hour away. So the ones round about here, well, get by. You try living in Meekatharra, you try living in Southern Cross. Different matter altogether. So the vision I offer isn't complicated. It's a healthcare that begins before sickness. Mental health as integral to everything that we do, to all health policy, and is not merely an afterthought. Let me tell you another real story about a mental health facility built in the Kimberley. I won't say where. It was built, designed to Perth standards. The statistics of Perth psychiatry were used to build a facility in the Kimberley with a majority Indigenous population. Do you think that money was well spent? It wasn't. It's a waste of money, actually. Funding flows first to prevention, to equity, and to places in need. We must grow a system. To grow a system, much like a forest is grown. It's not all one tree. It's a wide variety of approaches. But it's deeply useful in every part, deeply rooted in the soil of our state, of our people, the wonderful people of our state. A bit like a hemp plant, really. And it's not going to be a quick crop. It takes seasons of care, not starting in the 4-year cycle of who's going to be elected in the next time. It's not that. That does not work. That results in one side shouting at the other, we do it better, you did it worse than we're doing. That does not work. This budget is another example of that. It's a good budget as far as budgets go, but it doesn't solve their problems because it's giving a status quo, iterative result. Small changes made to an existing inadequate system. The forest that we grow for the people will stand for generations. This is what we need. And who's going to build that system? It's going to be the children who are building the future. I've got 2 boys now, out of school now. One's in university, one's actually serving. They are our future. Have they been well served by education system? Education is, of course, the key to opportunity. And I don't mean just book learning, I mean by learning, being able to actually manage with the resources we have and with the ability of the brain to function at a high level to produce the results that we need. And yet too often, as a result of our failing education system, not due to the teachers, but to the system that they're serving, too often we hand our children a key that doesn't fit the lock. Again, I'm going to point to the neoliberal idea of just educating children to work in mills, create the fortunes for those who own the mills, but the children themselves can just collapse and die. The educational shortcomings we've got just now. Traditional education model is completely inadequate for the needs of the future. Just look at what's happening with iterative large language models. ChatGPT, now level 5, Gemini AI, and we're looking at this as an enemy in the schools. No, we can't have this. Let's stop that. No, we need to actually learn how to use this for the future. But no, I recall the days when we weren't allowed to use calculators because you need mental arithmetic to manage. We need to actually move with the times. Our teachers are calling out. The teachers are begging for a change. I've been speaking to teachers, SSTWA, and teachers who have been in the studies of how to actually improve education. I was speaking to a headmaster just the other day there. They're begging for a change. The NAPLAN system we've got just now, why are we doing it? It's failing. The children we're just simply showing that we're not doing a good enough job in schools to bring children into the future. Reading and writing in year 12 when they go to university. It's actually abysmal. It's a complete fail. Children are coming into university now as young adults, unable to write essays, unable to actually use their brains to actually function at a higher level, approaching PhD level. They're not doing that. They haven't been trained. And as I said, the critical thinking skills are just not encouraged. So we're preparing them to be broken. We're preparing them to be mill workers. We're preparing them to work like busy bees, and they'll be expendable. We're preparing them for a world that no longer exists, a world of predictable careers, stable industries, and a single set of skills that will last a lifetime. That world is gone. In its place is a world of constant change, where technology advances faster than curricula, where climate and geopolitical shifts reshape the very map that our young people will navigate. And yet, this budget does not speak to that reality. It funds buildings, but not vision. It talks of pathways, but those pathways lead to yesterday. We need an education system that embraces the future. STEM and digital literacy for every child, lifelong learning, so that a worker in their 40s can study and other skills develop into other industries. We need an early childhood education that builds a foundation for all that follows. It isn't an expense. Education isn't an expense. It's an investment in our future. It's an investment in unlocking potential of our children, unlocking the building capacity and cultivating adaptability, especially for all the neurodiverse students that we have now. Because every child in Western Australia deserves an education that is not stuck in yesterday, but ready for tomorrow. Which brings me now to the environment. Nice that we've got some mention of the environment in the budget, but in Norse legend, there's a great ash tree, Yggdrasil. The branches and roots connect all realms of existence. It's a bridge between worlds. It's a thread of life itself. And if Yggdrasil were to wither, so too would all that depends on it. Our environment. Our environment is Yggdrasil. It connects our health, our economy, our very survival. And yet we treat it as if it were expendable, as if the branch we cut away today will not be the branch we need to stand on tomorrow. This budget gives us piecemeal measures and small nods towards renewable energy and scattered results for sustainability, but nothing that matches the scale of the crisis. We need to think again. We need to begin thinking new thoughts. We need to look at our environmental limitations and remove them. We need to look at the incremental environmental policy and change that. Our status quo thinking will not solve these problems. We have got loss of business opportunities. Let's take, for example, just the hemp industry. You know where my passions are for wellness, and the hemp as part of that. New thinking. The innovative approaches we could have could bring us over $20 billion into our economy. We could be making materials which go into space based on hemp. We could make ship hulls from hemp. We can make houses for the homeless from hemp. We could allow indigenous communities to grow hemp and house themselves, and educate themselves. We could do that. Do we? No. We need a comprehensive alternative vision for the future. Looking at housing, for example, what about the tree canopy of the housing? What about the use of different uses of water in the housing we're making? How about toilets then which don't require us to actually poo into actually drinking water? Would that be a sensible thing to do? Would that be helpful? What about a sustainable environment? What about encouraging gardens where we have actually vertical growing, where we can grow our own vegetables, fruit maybe even? We've also got to be concerned about a geopolitical realignment that we need, because the vision is clear for now. We need net zero by 2050. Actually, we need net zero by 2030. And more than that, we don't need net zero. We need to actually realise that we need to do different things now because our world needs us. And I'll tell you what, it's a bit like a war. You see, we're not going to change anything until we're in front of a crisis. It's a bit like World War II. And here are the planes coming across from France, actually, towards Britain. What did they need then? They got radar. Radar would not have been developed as quickly had the need not been expressly put out there because bombs were falling. We need to find a suitable solution right now, because otherwise we're not going to be here tomorrow. Are we at the point now where we are in an emergency, where we don't need to think iteratively about making minor changes to the existing status quo? We need to think radically and make radical changes. And can we create businesses which profit from this? This is what we're actually forbidding our current businesses, because we want to do more of the same old, same old. We need to think differently. We must think differently, or we will die. We need aggressive interim targets. We need investment in renewable energy infrastructure now. We need a circular economy that ends this era of waste, because we cannot live in a dying house. And a government that refuses to act with urgency is not a caretaker. It's an arsonist pretending to be a firefighter. I could speak about the gold standard of transparency. Truth is probably one of the important points that I find lacking in our society. We talk beside the point. We talk to opposite ends. We try and mitigate. We try and justify. We don't actually deal with what's really going on. There's no truth. And democracy, it must be said, has been fenced off. I mean, a good example was the Parliament of the last term, when we had basically an autocratic dictatorship masquerading as democracy. And we're quite happy with that. The gates are guarded not by the people who vote for us, but by those who profit from keeping the people out. We live in a society now where corporate donations buy legislation. So what we're doing right now in this House here is actually supporting those who actually profit from the status quo by making laws which fit them. I spoke earlier about the Environmental Protection Agency and the laws there which were created on the advice of the industrialists, spurning the advice of the environmentalists who are concerned about how do we actually live in this world. Now, I heard from my honourable colleague, Honourable Steve Thomas, that we can't actually just do this because the rest of the world is doing it worse. And I agree. That doesn't stop us from doing it, though, especially if we can make the business which is profitable and export the business to those countries where they can make profits too by the same business we create. We can start that. We do not have to be followers. Was it not in Australia that Wi-Fi was discovered? Until the Americans took it off us and said, we can do it better, you're too small, too poor, too weak. We have fantastic scientists here who could find solutions, and we can export that, and we can make profits from that. We don't have to actually just be the poor we. I want to be in this world, but I'm too weak. Come and help me. We are Australian. We are Australian. And the lobbyists just now, they're slipping between the ministerial offices and the corporate boardrooms as if the two were the same building. And the public is left to wonder whether their voice counts at all. And the answer is a resounding no. You vote for one side or the other, it's actually the same. And we're told this is just how politics works. It is not, is it? We are told this is just how politics works. And I say that is the problem. Integrity is not a slogan, it's a system built on transparency, accountability, and knowledge that power is borrowed from the people, not stolen from them. We can build that system. We must build that system, and we will build that system. A WA Integrity Commission with real teeth would be needed. A real-time donating and reporting, accessible to every citizen. Blockchain-based transparency for procurement, so every contract is open to scrutiny. Because trust, once lost, is very hard to regain, but it can be rebuilt. And when we restore that trust, we restore the foundation of our democracy itself. We can realign, rebuild our democracy. And this comes now into our geopolitical reality we're in just now. Australia first. And of all Australia, Western Australia, first of all. We can lead the way. How often do we feel the eastern states are just taking us for granted? They take our money and then leave us with nothing. Okay, all the decisions are made across there. Anyone feel that? So, at the moment, we have a traditional reliance on US-centric geopolitical alliances. It's neglecting meaningful engagement with our neighbours in Asia. And we're seeing in real time, today we're seeing in real time what the consequences are to our fragile democracy, with the current incumbent of that great office in the US now sending in the National Guard on the pretext of managing crime rate which has been falling, by the way. But no, he says, no, crime is increasing, I'm going to send in the National Guard. This is just one more step on the path to a fascist dictatorship. Now, I refuse to name that person. I refuse to name the office. I have another name for him, which is not parliamentary. I can't say that. So I use an acronym, OSGUS, OSG, of the US, OSGUS. And over a coffee, I can tell you what OSG means. Okay. And it's only going to take just a little bit more. I'm going to make a prediction now. I'm going to predict that in a not too distant future, there's going to be an inciting incident which causes OSGUS to call out military rule to preserve safety in his once great nation and abort or prolong the period for the next elections under the pretext of preserving democracy. I predict that now. And the thing I have to ask you is that not one single one of you jumped up and said nonsense. Not one single one of you said this cannot be, because we all know this is a possibility. And 40 years ago, that would have been unthinkable. How things have changed. Our geopolitical reality has been absolutely shattered. For most of the last century, our foreign policy has been shaped by one simple assumption, that our interests and the interests of the US are one and the same. And there was a time when that alignment made sense. There was a time. In the darkest days of the Second World War, our alliance was forged in shared danger, shared sacrifice. Although my father did say he was shot at by Americans because they didn't know where to shoot. But those days are gone. They're long gone. The America of today is not the America of 1945. It's a nation hopelessly divided. Its politics poisoned by hate and hatred, led by a man whose misogyny, narcissism and sociopathy are matched only by his skill in bending truth to his own ends. It's a nation that has sent Australians to die in Vietnam, based on a lie, has sent Australians to die in Iraq, in wars built on false causes, no different from the Nazi lies used to justify their invasion into Poland when they fabricated an incident at the border. We are waiting for that initiating event, to pause elections. And none of us is surprised that I can say that without disapproval. And now, at this very minute, they're preparing for another conflict, this time with China over Taiwan. A conflict in which the chief beneficiary would not be Australia, nor peace in our region, but American strategic and corporate interests. I'll mention chips, and that's where we are. We must not be led into another war that is not our own. We must not put Australian lives at risk for someone else's financial benefit. It's time to put Australia first and Western Australia first. Let us stand together as free people in a free land with a budget which reflects our needs and not the needs of Canberra. Let us remember what true patriotism means, to stand for our country and those who live here, each and every one of us. Let us look to our Australian values. Who are we? Where is the pride in who we really are? And let us put our country first, our state first, as we stand with our neighbours in peace and harmony. We just gave $500 million, part of the $400 billion that we're going to give away to a military-industrial complex for putative few submarines, which will be outdated by the time we get them, if we get them. And we're saying, I know from Rockingham, yes, we can have houses built and jobs here. Why are we not giving that money to our own people at our own, for our own needs? Why do we have to give it to someone else who's then going to pander to us with a few jobs, we'll look after you? Like hell you will. Looking after yourself first. And we'll get the crumbs of that. It's time not to look across the Pacific for leadership, but to our own region, to our Southeast Asian neighbours, our trading partners, our potential allies in building a peaceful and prosperous century. In Homer's Odyssey, Odysseus lashed himself to the mast to resist the siren's song. We too must resist the siren call of foreign entanglements that serve others at the cost of our own future. Let our course be charted by the compass of peace, not the magnet of conflict. Let us not forget our history. 1933, Weimar. The earlier Armenian Holocaust, now almost forgotten. We must serve truth, freedom, and justice. Did I mention justice? We have an injustice system at the moment. We need a justice system reform to fix the injustice we have. I did a calculation just now of the adult incarceration costs in Western Australia. These are estimates. And the mid-range is about $108,405 per year. It could be as high as $150,000. Juveniles, it's approximately $715,000 per year. There's a quotation I want to give you. Each year, Western Australia forgoes roughly $500 million in economic output because thousands of our people are warehoused instead of working. And we spend up to $1 billion more to keep them there. If we cut our imprisonment rates to modern Scandinavian levels and focus on rehabilitation, I'm talking Norway, Sweden, we could free up about $1 billion per year, every year, while building safer communities with far lower reoffending. By continuing to propagate the First Fleet mentality of abusing those who have stepped across the law because of social situations and many other causes, we are actually shooting ourselves in the foot to the cost of $1 billion. And it's leading to societal collapse. I'll point just to domestic violence. I think enough has been said about that. But what about strengthening our Indigenous rights and opportunities? What about that? Enhanced funding for Indigenous health, education and employment, expanded land rights, sustainable economic opportunities for Indigenous communities. And I point out, not so long ago, they decided that was not going to send juveniles, Indigenous juveniles, into prison because it's not politically correct now, quite rightly so. So, bearing in mind, they've often got fetal alcohol syndrome disorder, other neurodevelopmental disorders, mental health issues, and a whole host of behavioural issues. We're now sending them back into the community. This is a legislation we passed a year or two ago. Did we fund that transition? Not a single dollar was given to that. No psychiatrists, no psychologists. They've gone back into the communities to wreak havoc there. And we can blame them again. Where does that appear in the budget? It doesn't. The budget is very good at writing what they want to write, but the things that are not written simply don't appear. They don't matter to the people who read the budget because it's not there. Therefore, I'm not going to. I can't see it. This is an issue. This is a problem. I must say, the Honourable Jorn Sidma, I really appreciated your budget reply speech and learned from that. But I'm going a very different tack here. But it's the philosophical underpinnings of why things are not working well. Because justice in its purest form should be a bridge, a path from wrongdoing to restitution, from harm to healing. But too often our justice system has become a wall, one that divides, isolates and entrenches disadvantage. And our lawyers, I must tell you now, are sick of it. They're sick of actually pandering to the ills that are happening without the cause, the root cause, the fundamental cause being addressed. And what is the root cause of domestic violence? Or should we just penalise the results? We criminalise mental illness. Having worked in the corrective systems as a doctor, I can tell you now that a lot of the prison is spent in being a de facto psychiatric institution. And then you discharge them, untreated, back to commit the same problems. And what is it with the age of criminal responsibility so low that children are caught in a system designed for adults? Are we cool with this? Really? Are we cool with this? This isn't justice, it's a cycle. It's feeding on itself. It's a generation after generation cycle of entrenched poverty, crime, and the situations which cause our society to degenerate year on year. And we're seeing that now. We can do better. We could raise the age of criminal responsibility. We could do that. We could replace mandatory minimums with restorative justice. We could look at Norway and work out how they do that. We could invest in rehabilitation, and proper rehabilitation. How often, as a doctor, I was actually looking at prisoners prior to release to see how are you actually when it comes to sexual violence. Have you been rehabilitated? No. But are they a problem right now? No. Okay, discharge them. This is my personal experience. Society isn't measured by how harshly it punishes, but how effectively it heals. So, we'll come back to my leading point here, that the enemy of the people is actually status quo thinking. It's an underlying cause for decades of failed policy, and it's the belief that the status quo system is correct. We see this actually in the medical system just now. We still believe that ineffective treatments are effective, and we carry on doing it. The costs to our community. Did you know, for example, that there's around about 1,000 deaths every year in Western Australia due to the properly prescribed medications properly administered? And we keep on doing that. It's not recorded, by the way. This is just adapted here from the available statistics. In 2016, the TGA said that was for Australia-wide, there's 15 deaths due to properly prescribed medication properly administered. It's actually about 16 to 18,000. This neoliberal assault we have on people in favour of the vastly rich. You know what's happening? You can see it happening. Those who have money are getting much richer. Those who are in the middle classes, you see us being edged closer and closer to the edge of poverty. It's happening in front of our eyes, our very eyes. We're seeing this. It takes a crisis to demand change. And I do believe we're at a crisis right now. We must have change. The neoliberal financiers in controlling the politicians' grip is the status quo we need to fight. It's the enemy of the people. Innovation is simply not possible along with status quo thinking. We cannot do that. So across every portfolio, every crisis, every unkept promise, there's a common thread, the status quo. It's not a neutral caretaker. It's a parasite feeding on the lifeblood of the people. It's growing stronger every year. It's left unchallenged. It tells us that innovation is risky, that change is dangerous, that stability lies in keeping things exactly as they are, while the ground crumbles beneath our feet. It's the same status quo that has let the cost of living spiral while calling token gestures relief, let the health system decay while congratulating itself on opening new wards, let the environment burn while commissioning reports instead of action, sold our sovereignty in trade for the illusion for the illusion of protection. Not confined to one party. LP, Liberals, Nationals, they all still cling to a past that cannot be resurrected. Look to the United States, wrapped in a drive into Christo-fascist state, emulating the Taliban, but without the turbans. To the never-ending bilateral hate in Israel and Gaza. To the conservative mullahs hanging gays in Iran. To Russia attacking Ukraine. See what happens when entrenched power serves itself, when the voices of the people are drowned out by the drums of vested interest. Leads to collapse, to conflict, to loss of freedoms once thought unshakable. We look at the US right now, once thought unshakable. So it's not a fight, left versus right, right versus left. It's the people versus those who demand the status quo. There comes a time in our life, a life of every person, when patience becomes surrender. This budget is a surrender to the status quo. When silence becomes complicity, when the slow drip of disappointment hardens into the certainty that the system will not save us, when we believe the doomsayers of mainstream media, of course, bought by the vested interests. Now, there comes a time when people, we, the people, must stand. When the people must speak. Not just at times of election, but people must speak now. When people must act, act now. That time is not next year, it's not next election, it's now. This budget is an example of why we must act now, because we're not getting what we need as a people to flourish. For too long, we've been told that politics is the domain of the few, the well-connected, the well-funded, the well-fed. That change only comes when they permit it. I tell you, every freedom we cherish was won when the people decided to act without permission. The vested interests, the corporate giants, the political machine, the shadowy brokers of trade and influence, they're united in one aim, to keep you, as the people, passive. To convince the people that their role is to watch, to wait, to hope, to work harder and harder for less and less, because there is no other way. I say no. We must arise in the communities, arise in the streets, the schools, the councils, arise in hope, arise in courage, arise in unity. Stand together as one proud people, proud that we are West Australians. In the old myths, the phoenix dies in flame, only to rise again from the ashes, renewed, reborn, radiant. We stand today in the fire of a failed and failing system. But from this fire, a third democratic wave can rise. One built not on the brittle bones of the past, but on the unbreakable will of the people. This will be a wave that carries us into a new era of transparency, equity and honour in leadership. The power is with the people, the future is ours. And together, we all will arise.